Okay, I started.
You started it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome to class.
Hello.
How's everybody doing today?
Good. How are you?
What?
Good.
Good. Okay, cool.
Good. How are you?
Good. So welcome, and hope you all enjoy this today. So today we are going to be talking about autism.
Autism.
And what is out there research-wise, and what has been developed in terms of autism's treatments. So does anyone here have any experience with someone who has autism? Okay, would you like to share?
No.
Okay. Would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I've seen some people who are autistic and they need a lot of care.
They need a lot of care. In what way? Do you remember?
They need well, it depends on the stage of autism.
Mhm.
Like some people, they need physical care, or they need
Yeah.
all kinds of care.
They do need a lot of care, so you're very right. A lot of times they could go from someone who needs a nurse with them at all times
Correct.
and in the home, all the way to what we call level 1, which means they're functional, but they're still on the spectrum and can efficiently and positively be labeled as autistic. Now that's not very politically correct to say nowadays, but it is very common that people do get diagnosed with autism. And numbers are steadily rising, and that's something that we will see. And so, hope you all enjoy. What is autism? That's our first question here. And so, autism was first described and kind of discovered in 1943. It was by a guy named Leo Kanner. And he observed and he also described a group of children with autistic disturbances of affective contact. So what that means is that these subjects, these kids, were having difficulty relating socially with their families as well as their peers. So he wanted to diagnose it and he wanted to figure out what was the root of it. So that's how autism came about. And so the neat thing about autism is that it is not labeled as mental retardation or something in terms of like emotional disturbance or like a physical disturbance, but rather something that is progressed as you are born. It just kind of constantly comes up. And classic autism is actually one of several disorders categorized as autism spectrum disorders. So there's classic autism, but on the spectrum, there are also other types of autisms that are out there. Some examples include Rett's and Asperger's. And the difference between autism and Asperger's is that Asperger's is they are very adept in their speech. So autistic people, they have a lot of trouble verbally communicating, but people with Asperger's, they have little trouble with speech, but they also display a lot of signs and characteristics of people who do suffer from autism. So that is also on the spectrum disorder. So you can think of autism spectrum, the spectrum as literally a spectrum. There's a high end and there's a low end. So depending on the severity, you would be on the high end. If you're not very severe, you'd be on the low end. So autism usually manifests before a child is 3 years old, and it continues throughout his or her lifetime. The severity of the condition varies between individuals, ranging from severe to mild, just like the spectrum. And additionally, autism cannot be cured today, but it is treatable. With early diagnosis and intensive therapy, autistic children may be able to lead fulfilling and healthy lives. So, some symptoms of autism. So we know that autism is a complex brain disorder that affects the way the brain uses or transmits information. And some studies have been published to show that the causes for the disorder include genetic errors and possible environmental triggers. But more investigation is needed. So some studies have found abnormalities in several parts of the brain that are believed to have occurred during fetal development. The problem may be centered in the parts of the brain responsible for processing language and information from the senses. So we know that the language areas of the brain, such as the Wernicke's area, that's for speech, and the Broca's area also. And so those two areas are heavily impacted when it comes to people on the autism spectrum. So, as we know, humans are naturally social and they interact socially from birth onward. And children with autism have difficulty making social connections. A developmental milestone is when an infant can follow an object or person with his or her gaze. So that is one test that is used to tell whether someone has autism or not. It's whether they can follow the gaze of an object or a person. And also, they do not actively cuddle or hug, but rather they passively accept physical contact or they shy away from it. So they're not going to be very cuddly or loving or affectionate physically towards like their parents maybe or a loved one. This is also a big reason why parents want to treat that, because they long for that affection, but children have a lot of trouble with that. And the child may also appear to form no attachment to his or her parents, and they do not learn typical games such as peekaboo. So that may be very difficult for them.
Wow.
And they also do not readily accept social cues. Autistic children do not readily accept social cues. They do not know how or when to react to specific situations. Because of this, autistic children tend to look at and respond to different situations similarly. They do not understand that others have different perspectives, and therefore, autistic children seem to lack empathy. For the language problems, verbal communication problems vary greatly for autistic children. Some children do not speak at all. Some will only use 1 or 2 words at a time. Some autistic children may develop vocabulary only to lose it. Other autistic children may develop an extensive vocabulary. However, they have difficulty sustaining a natural back and forth conversation. Autistic children tend to talk in a sing-song voice or more robotically without emotional inflections. Often, autistic children do not take body language into consideration, and they take what is being said quite literally. So say, for instance, you say to little Jimmy, who has autism, we're going to shoot 4 basketballs and then we're going to go home. If you end up shooting 5, he may think that he's being lied to, and then now he cannot trust you. So you have to be very literal and very discreet when it comes to things of that nature, when it comes to people on the spectrum. So in this slide, we can see the range from level 1 to like level 3. So the higher the level, which is towards away from 0, that is going to represent your severity of autism. So someone from level 1 may require support, such as a daycare, or other individuals who have autism. Level 2, you may need to need a little more than that, like maybe be placed in a separate classroom or require special attention in school. And level 3 is almost total isolation. As you can see, the kids with autism have difficulty interacting with peers. They're typically alone because they do not understand or they have trouble understanding typical social cues. So now, diagnosing autism. So how do we know exactly when a kid does have autism? Well, first let's talk about the numbers. The number of children diagnosed with autism, which could include the autistic disorder, Asperger's, and Rett's, has increased substantially over several decades and may be as high as 1 in 110 or 1 in 150
Wow.
in children alone. So autism, it is high, yep. Autism is 3 to 4 times more common in boys than in girls, and 20 to 50 times more common in siblings of children with autism than in the general population. So that is more research to support the fact that it has to do with your genetics. Currently, the cause of the increase in prevalence is being debated and researched. Factors such as changing and broadening the diagnostic criteria, increased awareness of autistic symptoms,